So I would say I'll preface my question with this. In basketball, I think Illinois and Michigan are probably in similar ranges with NIL and things like that. I mean, Illinois, there's rumors how much we just spent to bring everybody back and get Stephon Vox from Providence. And I'm sure Michigan's roster is not going to be cheap for basketball. And then football, I think it's definitely a different range with what Michigan's working with. But Camden Lapati, the quarterback Michigan just got the day after he decommits from Illinois, which that had been rumored for a while. Sort of just what's your take being on the football side of things, which football is king, being one of those big dogs, like obviously Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, whatever, they've always been able to get the recruits they want. Now it's just kind of different, like how it's so public. Hey, I can walk in and be like, I mean, Brett Bielema, he loves to speak his mind, but he basically said, like Michigan offer more money. So like, what's kind of your thoughts on just the NIL and where Michigan's at in football and basketball funding?
NIL is such an interesting thing, and it's something that I want to do for the rest of my career, at least work in that space. So I have a lot to understand about it, but there's so much room for growth still. And I think you're exactly right. When it comes to programs like Michigan that have so much money, that's what the piece that fans are going to have less patience with about building a team anymore. Michigan spent $10 million on its roster last year. As you said, they're probably going to spend something similar this year. Illinois, probably the same. And at least with a basketball team, it's only you're investing in 7-8 guys. So it's also very different than football. Football, Michigan football can invest upwards of $30 million. $30 million was last year's, could be even more. But with $30 million, right, you're like, okay, get me a very, very strong team. But as you said, there's the public side of it, the rental side of it, where players can just leave after a year. It is very difficult to build a program, especially a football team is so different than building a basketball team with the amount of guys you're paying and you're trying to commit to and trying to promise, like, hey, this may not be your first year. You're coming in like Savion Hyder. We may not get you as our number one back this first year, but if you can please just stay with us for 2 years, you will be better than Blake Corum. Like, that's harder to do nowadays. And that's, I think, with like Michigan, that's the struggle that it's going to start running into every single year when they're not going to perform at the highest level is, what are we doing this for? The donors are going to keep asking, we won a national championship 3 years ago. We know that high now. We know what it feels like. Get us back there. And when you have this coaching rotation on a carousel and you have these quarterbacks that are just going everywhere for so much money, it's a lot of investing different kinds of resources. Plus, as in Illinois and Michigan, we have 25, 26 other teams that we're also trying to field and still trying to finance. And Michigan cares very deeply about its non-revenue sports. So its football team is having to think about that. Ward Manuel, our athletic director, is having to think about that every time that you want to invest just more and more money into football of, oh, wait, our women's basketball team literally just today had to put a full presser out saying we need $100,000 by tomorrow to keep our players for next year. And they're publicly saying that. And so that is the tricky part of what a Michigan can run into, because you're giving an experienced coach not a lot of time to go to a completely other side of the country, deal with completely different people. And you're telling him, hey, number one, your age, obviously you're getting up there in age. But number two, you have this fan base that is really starting to get, angst and angry that there's not been a good football team. And there's been all this negativity around this amazing school they're also prideful to go to. Fix it now. And how do you do that without just throwing a lot of money at people?
Yeah. So again, you kind of touched on that a little bit, but there's a lot of Illinois fans, and I'll admit I don't pay as much attention to the non-revenue sports, but there's a lot of Illinois. I mean, people always joke for years we're just a golf school because golf was like our best sport by far. And women's volleyball, women's basketball's finally picked it up. Shauna Green's doing an amazing job. What do you predict? Again, Illinois and Michigan, similar ranges for basketball, probably not for football, but still top half, quarter of the Big Ten, whatever. What do you predict sort of happening in the next 5-10 years with those non-revenue sports and then just with college sports in general? Because it can't keep going like this. Like, you can't, in 10 years, you're not going to be able to pay your backup point guard $7 million who scores 3 points a game. So like, where do you see it going? And then what do you see with non-revenue sports?
Yeah, this is like I have a lot of thought into this. This was a lot part of my law school essays and my senior thesis at Michigan. There's a few things. I have like one main radical idea, which maybe is not as radical anymore, but I really see college sports going into a super conference kind of outlook where you have the Big Ten and SEC and the ACC and Big 12 may have to just join that, but they're going to have to separate themselves because it's not going to be able to keep being fair going forward of all these other teams. And you may even see shifts within the conference. And I'm not going to call particular schools, but there's one Big Ten school in particular that was $80 million in debt last year. And that is not sustainable in this current structure when you're competing with Michigan, Ohio State, Illinois, these schools that are just investing more and more money into these programs. There obviously is the easiest solution with quotes of a salary cap, but that's just really not feasible anytime soon, I don't think, because you're going to have to unionize the players, and these players are in college. So how are you going to be able to unionize guys who may only be there for a year? That's the really tricky part that they're not going to be able to run into. They're going to have to run into and try to get around. But at least I think the Big Ten revenue deal is done in 2034, I believe. I may be wrong about that, but it was around that time. And right around that time is when I can foresee Big Ten teams really taking a look at what the structure is. There may be more movement around then in terms of conferences alignments. You already heard about, I'm sure, with the Big Ten, with the private equity deal that fell through but was really being talked about. That would be an opportunity for particular schools to then go in on one of those, and they may pull back from the Big Ten because they're saying, I'm going to be like Utah and just get my own deal and deal with it that way. So I can really see it ramping up over the next less than 10 years from now, maybe 8 years from now. That's going to be the next catastrophic shift in college sports. And I say all this to save non-revenue sports, to save, the discrepancies. Michigan has always said they were going to try to keep non-revenue sports, and it's obviously going to keep being harder when you need to invest more money in your sports teams when other schools are just going to invest more money. And you're going to see maybe Illinois invest a lot more money into golf, and you're going to see Nebraska invest all their money into volleyball, and you're going to see Maryland look at lacrosse, and they're just going to pick certain sports to invest in, which is only going to create more inequity and more, unevenness in the sporting landscape. So there needs to be just something to start. And I think the thing to start is to separate the schools by their tiers and to say, okay, these are the schools that we can at least have a floor for, where it's not unfair. These are the schools that you can compete here. If you can raise more money, you can jump up, but it's going to need to be that tier system when there's no floor or cap that's just letting anyone do anything anymore.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And that fascinates me because obviously I've grown up, college sports have been such a big part of my life. Like, it's sad to think about them possibly like going away and in the way that we see them, at least. But the product on the court and on the field has been arguably better because, you're getting guys like, Adai Mara, maybe he takes a risk, and goes to the league. I think the Avicic twins at Illinois probably would have taken the leap and tried to get like a second round pick or something, but they're coming back. So the product, I think, is better. But yeah, it's the TV money and the different levels of, the difference between Ohio State and Northwestern, the fact they're in the same conference is just crazy. But
it is.